The rest of these nuts that exploit this trans stuff, to me, are bad people. They're not misguided, they're bad people. So the women's basketball controversy. All right. You may not think it's that important, but it kind of is in a culture war situation. You got two ladies that play for the Indiana Fever. One of them is Caitlin Clark, superstar, and the other one is Sophie Cunningham.
Why is CC in trouble? Why is CC in trouble, Bill? Let us know.
Oh,
There was a time when a broadcast booth calling a women's professional basketball game stuck to the game. Pick and rolls, shooting percentages, rotations on defense.
When I walk out of the locker room, I shouldn't be not fearful of what the conversation is going to be, but, you just it's emotionally exhausting, it's draining, it makes your shoulders tense because, people don't want to talk about the basketball. They just want to stir it up and make it something else.
okay. So Ms. Clark's been relatively classy about this. She has not made any accusations herself this week.
That's literally been her only statement, actually addressing the media in the 3 years she's been in this league.
That version of the sport still exists on the court, but the conversation around it has moved somewhere else entirely. The numbers explain why. Sports Business Journal has clocked league-wide viewership up 12% year-over-year through the midpoint of the 2026 season, with more than 73 million people tuning into WNBA broadcasts by the All-Star break, a record for that point in any season. Commissioner Kathy Engelbert has called it the most watched season in league history.
I think it's kind of common sense, and I think I'll always believe in that. I think it's really important to protect children, and that's little girls who are also involved in that category. And so I stand on what I said, and I always believe that. I'm there to love, but I'm also there to love biological women, and I think that there are rights that need to be protected. And like I said, I'm going to stand true to that. I'll never falter in my beliefs in that, but I have never once said I hated the trans community. Like I said, I think there's space for everyone.
Okay.
And then Sophie Cunningham, even last night, said there's room at my table.
A new 11-year, $2.2 billion media rights deal is in its first year of use, and attendance across the league has climbed 16% alongside it. The Indiana Fever alone have driven a disproportionate share of that surge. Every one of the team's 44 regular season games was picked up by a national broadcast partner this year, the first time any team has managed that in league history, and Fever games now account for the 7 most watched broadcasts of the season. A July matchup against the New York Liberty averaged 2.58 million viewers on CBS and peaked near 3.1 million, making it the most watched WNBA telecast in CBS history and the 3rd most watched regular season game since 2000. Days earlier, a Fever Aces game on NBC and Peacock had already claimed a similar record with 2.64 million viewers. The All-Star game itself pulled in 2 million average viewers on ESPN, a 44% jump from the prior year, and outdrew the NBA's own All-Star game in attendance for the first time. That kind of audience does not arrive by accident, and it has not stayed confined to basketball commentary. Cable news hosts, political commentators, and culture war combatants who had never watched a possession of professional basketball are now weighing in nightly. At the center of nearly all of it are a handful of players who can generate a news cycle simply by stepping to a podium after a game. Bill O'Reilly is one of the more recent additions to that conversation. On his program No Spin News, O'Reilly devoted a segment to what he characterized as rough physical treatment of Indiana Fever guard Caitlin Clark and the media's handling of it. His involvement is notable less for what he said and more for what it represents. A commentator built for cable news politics choosing to spend airtime on a basketball rookie's treatment on the court. When a figure like O'Reilly decides a WNBA storyline is worth his audience's time, it tells you how far outside the sports pages this has traveled. His framing treated the physical hostility directed at Clark as part of a broader pattern he saw playing out in the league's coverage, tying it to the same media dynamics he covers on other nights. To understand how a professional basketball season turned into this kind of story, it helps to look at what's been happening off the court as much as on it. Clark's rookie and sophomore seasons were defined in part by contact that drew national attention. In the summer of 2024, Chicago Sky guard Chennedy Carter delivered a blindside shoulder check on Clark during an inbounds play, a foul that was retroactively upgraded to a flagrant one. NBA Commissioner Adam Silver was asked about it before the NBA Finals and called it a welcome to the league moment, while also acknowledging what he described as larger societal issues at play, including race. That pattern of physical contact has continued into the 2026 season. In June, Phoenix Mercury forward Alyssa Thomas made contact with Clark's neck during a scramble for a loose ball, play the league ruled a flagrant 2 and for which Thomas was suspended 1 game. Thomas herself pushed back afterward, saying the league had failed to protect its own players from the backlash that followed, and her family received threats online in the aftermath. Weeks later, New York Liberty forward Breanna Stewart made contact with Clark's face during a defensive contest that went uncalled, adding to a season already logging Clark among the most heavily fouled players in the league, even as she also picked up a string of technical fouls of her own, 7 by late July, putting her within range of an automatic suspension under WNBA rules. These are not isolated flashes of contact either. Clark has drawn fouls at one of the highest rates in the league this season, and analysts covering the team have pointed out that the volume looks less unusual once compared against her overall workload and shot attempts. At the same time, some of that contact has drawn its own criticism from the opposite direction, observers accusing Clark of exaggerating minor contact to draw calls, a charge that surfaced again after a play against the Golden State Valkyries, in which she went to the ground, clutching her leg on what replays showed was a comparatively light bump. That dynamic, real physical contact on one end and disputed flopping accusations on the other has made it difficult for any single narrative about how Clark is officiated to hold up cleanly, and it's been used as ammunition by both sides of the broader argument depending on which incident they choose to highlight. Every one of these incidents has been read by different audiences in different ways. And that's where the media fight actually lives. Congressional Republicans got involved after the Thomas incident. Texas Congressman August Pfluger published a letter accusing the league of failing to protect Clark from what he called violent targeting and threatening a Department of Justice and Equal Employment Opportunity Commission review. Jemele Hill responded to that letter on her show, calling the congressional intervention ridiculous and arguing that a league that is roughly 70% black and includes a large number of openly LGBTQ players was being used as a target in a broader culture war. Hill has been one of the most consistent and most criticized voices in this conversation. She has said publicly more than once that she dislikes discussing Clark at all, because any commentary about her game gets read through a political lens no matter how it's intended. Hill has also pushed back directly on the idea that the WNBA doesn't accept white players, calling that claim false, while separately arguing that some of the hostility directed at black players accused of fouling Clark reflects racial bias in how commentators describe those plays. Her critics, including columnists at outlets like Outkick, have accused her of doing exactly what she claims to oppose, framing nearly every incident involving Clark through a racial lens. Whichever side of that argument someone lands on, the pattern is the same. A play on the court becomes a referendum on race, politics, or both within hours. Sophie Cunningham became her own flashpoint in a different direction entirely. In a wide-ranging ESPN profile, the Fever Guard, sometimes nicknamed MAGA Barbie online, was asked about her political views and used the opportunity to talk about transgender participation in women's sports. She said she wanted to protect young girls in locker rooms and in competition from having to compete against what she called biological men. Cunningham insisted the comments didn't come from a place of hatred, saying there was room in her life to love people from every community, but she also said plainly that she would never back down from the position and would stand true to it. The response was immediate and largely negative among current and former players. Seattle Storm center Stephanie Dolson spoke out in support of transgender athletes ahead of a game against Cunningham's Fever, a clear rebuke aimed directly at her comments. Writers who cover the league argued that regardless of Cunningham's intent, the language she used, particularly the phrase biological men, has a history of being used in ways that are demeaning toward transgender people, and that her comments put her at odds with the WNBA's own No Space for Hate platform. On the other side, Cunningham found support from unlikely corners, including White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt, who defended her publicly and criticized the backlash as an example of Democrats attacking a female athlete for stating what Leavitt described as an obvious truth. When two teenage fans brought signs supporting Cunningham to a later game against Seattle, they said they were confronted by a Storm co-owner, which only added another layer to an already tangled story. Cunningham herself has not walked anything back. Days after the initial comments, she posted online that she said what she said and left it there. What's striking is how differently these two threads, the physical treatment of Clark and Cunningham's comments on trans athletes, have been absorbed by the same audience. Fans who feel Clark is being targeted on the court for who she is have, in many cases, become the same fans defending Cunningham's remarks off it. Fans who see the Clark discourse as manufactured outrage tend to be the same ones condemning Cunningham's comments as harmful. The result is that nearly every storyline in the league right now gets sorted almost instantly into one of two camps, with very little room in between. Sports columnists who've tried to occupy that middle ground, treating individual incidents as basketball plays rather than referendums on culture, have found themselves criticized from both directions for either downplaying real harm or manufacturing outrage where none exists. None of this is happening in a vacuum, and league officials have mostly avoided getting pulled directly into it. Fever head coach Stephanie White has spoken publicly about the volume of technical fouls piling up on her roster, saying there have to be conversations about being more strategic with them, a comment aimed as much at her own players as at the officiating crews assessing them. She has also called some of the online vitriol directed at her players, including the racist commentary aimed at Alyssa Thomas after the neck incident, unacceptable. WNBA leadership, for its part, has largely tried to treat the physical contact as standard rookie initiation rather than something requiring a policy response, even as the discourse around it has ballooned into something closer to a national story than a basketball one. Engelbert has faced criticism of her own throughout this stretch, both for how she's characterized rivalries among the league's biggest stars in the past and for her handling of officiating complaints raised by coaches around the league, adding another figure whose every public comment now gets parsed for what it signals about where the league's leadership actually stands on a season that has become as much about tone as it is about wins and losses. The business side of this cannot be separated from the noise either. The league's new media rights deal locks in a decade plus of national broadcast partners, which means CBS, NBC, ESPN, and their streaming arms all have a direct financial stake in exactly the kind of attention this season has generated. Two networks have already found themselves in a minor dispute of their own over whose broadcast could legitimately claim the title of most watched game of the year, with CBS and NBC each pointing to different measurement methodologies to back their own record. It's a small dispute on its face, but it reflects a larger truth about where the league's incentives now sit. Every hard foul, every controversial comment, every congressional letter becomes another data point driving casual viewers to tune in. Every hard foul, every controversial comment, every congressional letter becomes another data point driving casual viewers to tune in. People who never watched a WNBA possession before 2024 are now setting reminders for national broadcasts, not necessarily because they care about the standings, but because they want to see whether the next flashpoint is coming. League executives have watched viewership climb alongside every controversy, which puts them in an uncomfortable position. Cracking down harder on physical play or on player commentary risks dulling the exact tension that's been pulling in new audiences. Leaving it alone risks letting the culture war swallow the sport it's attached to. There's no indication the league is settled on which way it wants to go, and every new incident, another hard foul, another viral quote, another congressional letter, seems to postpone that decision further. The debate over how much of the league's growth belongs to any single player has become its own subplot within the larger story. Supporters of the broader player pool, from Aja Wilson to Nafisa Collier to Breanna Stewart, argue that framing the league's rise as a one-player phenomenon erases years of work by athletes who built its audience before Clark ever arrived. Clark's supporters counter with the raw numbers. She has now appeared in 6 of the 10 highest-rated games in WNBA history, and broadcasts without her have shown measurable ratings drops compared to games she plays in. Both things can be true at once, and the league's own marketing has struggled to thread that needle. Congressman Brendan Boyle drew Jemele Hill's public criticism after suggesting the league undersold Clark commercially, comparing the situation to how the NBA marketed Michael Jordan. Hill responded that a self-described non-fan of the league had no basis for judging its marketing strategy in the first place. Small exchanges like that one, a congressman and a sports commentator sparring over branding, illustrate just how far the conversation has drifted from anything resembling a traditional basketball story. What's clear is that the players absorbing all of this are doing so while still expected to perform at an elite level. Clark, addressing reporters during All-Star Weekend, said plainly that people sometimes forget she's a real person who has feelings and gets frustrated, a comment that drew its own wave of commentary from analysts debating whether she'd shown enough self-awareness in the moment. Cunningham has continued to play through a season now defined publicly by comments made off the court rather than anything she's done on it. Thomas played through a suspension and a wave of online abuse aimed at her and her family. Whatever the league decides to do about the tone of the conversation surrounding it, the players themselves don't get to opt out of the conversation the way network executives or newsletter writers can. They answer for it after every game, whether the questions are about a screen they set, a foul they picked up, or an opinion they gave to a reporter weeks earlier that's still generating headlines. Media coverage itself has become a recurring flashpoint, sometimes eclipsing the games it's meant to describe. In late July, USA Today columnist Nancy Armour published a piece criticizing what she characterized as Clark's flopping and its effects off the court, writing that Clark's fan base included what she called a white nationalist faction and drawing a comparison to the lynching of Emmett Till in the process. The column drew immediate backlash, not from people defending Clark's style of play, but from readers and fellow journalists who felt the comparison was wildly disproportionate to a discussion about foul calls. It became one of the more discussed media missteps of the season, cited alongside the Hill and Cunningham storylines as evidence of how quickly WNBA commentary can spiral into territory far removed from basketball. ESPN analyst Monica McNutt found herself in a similar position after Clark's comments at All-Star Weekend about the emotional toll of covering the sport under constant scrutiny. McNutt responded by saying that at 24, Clark still had room to grow in accountability and self-awareness regarding her role in what McNutt called the league's larger sisterhood. The comment set off its own wave of criticism from Clark supporters online, some of whom argued McNutt had no standing to define who belonged in that sisterhood, or why Clark owed loyalty to players who had, in their view, treated her with hostility rather than solidarity. Others defended McNutt's point as a reasonable read on a young star still adjusting to her platform. Either way, a comment about locker room culture became, within a day, another data point in the same argument playing out across every other storyline this season. Whether criticism of Clark is fair scrutiny of a still developing player or an unfair standard applied because of who she is. Angel Reese has found herself in a parallel version of the same story, at times overlapping directly with Clark's. Reese has accumulated her own run of technical fouls this season, drawing comparisons to Clark's total and prompting some of the same debate over whether officiating crews are treating both players inconsistently or simply reflecting genuinely more physical, emotionally charged basketball. The two have been linked in league discourse since their rookie seasons, when both were credited with driving a historic surge in jersey sales and viewership, and Engelbert herself sparked controversy back then by suggesting their rivalry carried a racial dimension, a framing the players' union pushed back on directly. That history means every new storyline involving either player gets read, fairly or not, against the other, reinforcing a binary the league has never quite managed to break out of. The quieter version of the WNBA, the one built around box scores and post-game breakdowns of pick-and-roll coverage, still exists somewhere underneath all of this. But it's no longer the loudest part of the conversation, and there's little sign that's changing anytime soon. As long as hard fouls keep landing on the league's most visible players, and as long as its athletes keep speaking candidly about politics in a media environment built to amplify exactly that kind of comment, the sport and the culture war attached to it are likely to keep moving as one story rather than two. The record numbers filling network press releases each week and the outrage cycles filling social media each night are at this point two sides of the same growth curve, and nothing about the league's current trajectory suggests either one is slowing down before the other.